Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Christina Coons and I'm the Marketing and Event Coordinator here at JMark. And this is another one of our Business Builder webinars. These are designed to help business decision makers answer some questions that they might have day to day in the operations of your business. So today we have customer experience, what every CEO and business leader should know. And this should take about 40 minutes. And feel free to ask questions during the presentation, whether you're listening in from registering or whether you're on Facebook Live. I will be watching for those and we'll answer those at the end. And next up, we have another webinar called 5 Choices in Leader, A Path to Extraordinary Success. And that's another one that I'm really excited about. I think it's going to be awesome. So just visit our events pages for more information at jmark.com/events, and that'll give you all the info there and let you register if you're interested in that. So today we are excited to have Michael Bartlett. He is our Director of Experience Innovation here at JMark. And a little bit about him. Michael's experience includes work with automation algorithms, artificial neural networks, and natural language processing systems to improve business capabilities. He is a self-described philanthropreneur, author, and the creator of ccxpexamsimulator.com. And that is an AI tool that facilitates optimal learning for the Certified Customer Experience Professional exam. Michael lives in Missouri with his wife and 2 rescue dogs, and he holds a master's degree in artificial intelligence from the University of Sussex. So welcome, Michael. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to everybody who's made some time to attend the webinar today. This is going to be quite a brief, high-level overview of customer experience. I wanted to keep it aimed pretty much at CEOs and business leaders. But what we're going to do is at the end of the webinar, I'm actually going to do a little bit of a deep dive because I spoke to a few folks before this presentation and a number of people expressed interest in learning about how to tie customer experience to ROI. So I thought I'd actually do a little worked example at the end, which will be a little bit of a deep dive, but these slides will be available afterwards. So if it's a little too in-depth for anybody, you can always review those in your own time and then go ahead and contact me afterwards. So today what we're going to do, Today what we're going to do is do an introduction, then I'm going to talk about customer experience and we're going to go through a definition. Then we're going to look at the role that emotion and biases play in customer experience. And then we're going to talk about why it matters, and we're going to give some key statistics, which you might find very useful in terms of making business cases. There are 2 big questions that a lot of people ask about customer experience, so we'll talk about those and how to answer them. And then we'll look at the 6 core competencies. There are a number of different people that have different approaches to customer experience. The Customer Experience Professionals Association, which I'm a member of, they kind of break it down into 6 core competencies. Forrester Research do the same thing, and those 6 kind of align with each other. So that seems to be the standard way that people are approaching. And so that's kind of why I wanted to talk about those 6 and give you guys an insight into how each of those makes up the complete picture of customer experience. Then in the end part, we're going to look at the case for customer experience ROI. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll do that little working example. So quick introduction. So I'm the Director of Experience of Innovation here at JMark. I put my email on the slides here, so if anyone wants to contact me afterwards, you feel free. I've had 2 decades of experience, and I've worked in many different size companies. So, I worked at little startups when I first began my career, moved all the way up to large consultancies, actually worked for Accenture for quite some time, and that was actually a great role and a very customer-facing, customer experience kind of role. And then at one point, I even worked for a space agency, which is pretty interesting. So I've seen lots of different types of organizations. I've seen different types of structure and how those structures can affect the customer experience and also the employee experience. So I hope to bring some of those insights forward today. I'm a member of the Customer Experience Professionals Association. I hold the CCXP, which is the Certified Customer Experience Professional. And as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, I wrote, it's not really the official book, but it's the only book that's really out there at the moment that helps people prepare for the exam. And my passion, as Christina mentioned earlier, is I love working with animals. I got a rescue dog in 2015 purely by accident, and that kind of snowballed from there. And so now I have 2 rescue dogs and just do a lot of work on the side. And a lot of the money that I get from my book and from my simulator I put into helping animals. So I'm lucky because I get to do what I love for a living, and then I also get to use some revenue from that to actually help, my other passion, which is obviously dogs and cats. So let's begin with customer experience, and let's start off with a definition. So a good definition is how your customers perceive their interactions with your brand. So of course, what this is saying is perceptions are greater than reality. It doesn't matter if you've provided what you think is an excellent customer experience. If the customer feels that they've had a bad experience, then their perception is what matters. It's all about expectations. It's all about making sure the expectations are set correctly. There's two different types of expectation. There's implicit expectations. So that's, for example, when you go to a restaurant, there's a certain amount of time that will pass before you feel that the experience isn't very good. No one sets that time limit. You just kind of have an instinctual feel because it's implicit within our culture. And then there are explicit expectations. For example, when a customer says 50% discount, and then of course you get to the store and there's not a 50% discount. So those are two examples of the different types of expectations. People sometimes confuse customer experience with customer service. So I always like to make it clear that customer service isn't the same thing. If you imagine checking into a hotel, the customer service would be your interactions with the staff. Your customer experience would be everything from how you feel when you walk into the hotel, actually finding the hotel in the first place, maybe frustration with parking, what the room fragrance is like, all those little details that can create interesting memories for you that you will then be able to go and tell others about. And so that's kind of where emotions come from. So perceptions are obviously influenced by both emotions and memory. Your emotions will shape the perceptions, and then they'll go into your memory, and then that really becomes the customer experience. So if you can, even if someone has a rocky customer experience, if you can make sure they walk away with a happy memory, then they're more likely to see that as the customer experience than maybe the rocky patches that they experienced. Two lovely quotes here. Recognize that customers decide emotionally and then justify rationally. A great example of that would be voting as well. Most people vote based on emotion rather than going through and looking at everything rationally. Most people buy emotionally rather than rationally as well. But if you're asked to defend your decisions, you'll always, you go back to the rational side of your brain. And then I love this quote: brands are a bundle of associations, a bundle of memories. And when those memories are good, we feel affection for the brand. That's by Sean Smith, who's the author of Managing the Customer Experience. In my humble opinion, the best book ever written on the subject, even though it was written many years ago. And I think this says a lot really about the essence of why customer experiences are important. If we feel an affection for a brand, we're more likely to recommend them to others, and we're more likely to go back ourselves. And likewise, if we feel animosity for a brand, then we're more likely to write negative reviews. And the sad part of life is that it only takes one negative review to cancel out 5 positive ones. So making sure that our customers' emotions are in check and they're feeling the way we want them to feel when they go through the experience is equally important as actually all of the functional aspects. And biases are very important as well because they affect the customer expectations and perceptions. So what I always say is when you're designing experiences, it's better to design experiences that complement how the human brain works rather than work against it. We've basically got 2 types of brains. You've probably seen this from, there's a book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and there's a lot of material coming out on behavioral economics now. But we have a primal part of our brain that makes decisions instantaneously, is very quick. And then we have the logical part that's less emotional, and that part is the one that has to think hard, and it causes cognitive depletion every time we have to use it. There's a very good book on user experience design simply called Don't Make Me Think. And I think that's pretty much the best rule if you're going to be designing any kind of software interface or any interface, regardless of whether it's software or not. The more people have to think, the more frustrated they get. People want something that's intuitive. So what we do is we rely on our primal brain, and we also rely on things called heuristics. They're shortcuts that we create. So if I say to you, what's 2 + 2, you immediately know the answer. You don't have to think about it. And that's something that you created in your mind. It's a heuristic. When you're driving your car, that's another heuristic. You can kind of do these things on autopilots. Humans like to use the least amount of energy possible to make decisions. And so when designing these customer experiences, we try not to engage the logical brain because, as it says here, cognitive depletion will take effect. Some very interesting thing about other biases as well. So Bob Hayes said the early stage satisfaction is a good predictor of how satisfied a customer will be later in the customer experience life cycle. That's an example of the primacy effect. You're more likely to remember the first thing in an experience and the last. That's the primacy effect and the recency effect. Also, the idea that we mentioned earlier, one negative review cancels out 5 positive reviews. That relates to something called the loss aversion bias. We're more compelled to avoid loss than we are to gather gain. And so why does this matter? So improving the customer experience has been shown to correlate with increased customer retention, acquisition, and revenue. Now, Forrester have done a lot of research on this, and what they've basically concluded are there are entire industries where merely being adequate at customer experience actually can make you stand out. There are huge gaps between leaders in customer experience and laggards in each of the individual industries. And so what this means is customer experience has become a powerful differentiator for businesses that can do it well. When we talk about, is it even worth doing customer experience? One very interesting way of looking at it is saying, well, if your customers begin embracing CX, then just think of the ROI of doing nothing. And that brings us to some interesting statistics. So brands that improve customer experience increase their revenue by about 10 to 15%, and they lower costs on average 15 to 20%. That comes from McKinsey Insights. Those having an excellent customer experience are 6 times more likely to repurchase than those who have a poor customer experience. That's the Temkin Group. I think they recently got acquired by Qualtrics. 64% of people confirm CX is more important than price. There's actually a really interesting book called Descartes Error that pretty much shows that, the majority of buying decisions are emotional and price rarely factors into it. And then CX leaders grow revenue 12% faster than CX laggards. So we've kind of put the case forward for this is something that people should be very interested in. But now we need to go and look at it a little bit more in depth and answer 2 big questions. So most people will be saying, how can I improve the customer experience for my customers? And how can I prove the ROI of any CX efforts? Customer experience is sometimes seen as being a bit fluffy. And so as a result, people don't tend to take it seriously, and they're very cynical about, does this really translate to extra revenue, or is this just something that's going to make people feel good and is going to be a waste of money? A friend of mine named Ian Golding wrote a book about customer experience, and he actually, the title of the book is quite fitting. It's called Customer What? And I think that's a brilliant title, because a lot of people, when they hear customer experience, that's the first thing that they say. So let's try and answer those 2 questions. So we'll look at the 6 core competencies. They're creating a CX strategy. They're embedding a customer-centric culture, aligning your organization around your strategy, introducing what we call a voice of customer program, designing your branded experiences, and then measuring your customers' experiences. So for strategy, basically the way to look at this is think of, and I've put it in bold here, customer needs tend to translate very clearly into markets. And then from markets, you should be able to clearly extract and write your mission statement. And then from your mission statement, you should then be able to devise your brand promise. And this really all factors into customer experience, because at the end of the day, your brand promise is your expectations. And you need to make sure that those expectations are either met or exceeded at every touch point that you have. So good strategy flows from the strong mission statement, and it should be focused around the needs around the market. It should never be focused around a product. You need to know why your business exists and how it changes the world. And I don't mean on some grand scale. I just mean, if your business was to not exist tomorrow, where would your customers go and why would they go there? And so that kind of helps you understand the needs that you're filling in the world. Mission statements are very important as well, because they really guide decision-making during rough times. I remember back when Amazon were looking at introducing the third-party sellers, and there was a lot of debate within Amazon as to whether that was the right thing to do or not. And in the end, because of their mission statement about being the most customer-centric business in the world, they said, well, if this is ultimately going to make things better for our customers and it's going to be all about them, then it is the right decision. And so that's, I'm not saying they just use their mission statement, but it's a very good guide, especially when making strategic decisions. The strategy needs to be very deliberate about who the business serves and how it will provide a differentiated experience. Because as we all know from the work of Michael Porter, you're either competing on price or cutting costs, or you're differentiating. And so most people are differentiating in this day and age. So how is your business going to be different? How's the experience going to be different? The brand promise, as I touched on earlier, is the promised benefit. So we're going to talk about the need and how it's met. And this will typically be included in marketing materials and must always be met or exceeded when the customer interacts with your brand. The CX strategy is what specific CX steps you will take to complement your overall business strategy. So then we need to think about how we embed a customer-centric culture. The key things are to know your core values and then hire for cultural fit. It's very easy to do something at the beginning of a life cycle than it is halfway through it. So if you can get the right employees in at the beginning, that's going to be much more beneficial than trying to take existing employees who maybe don't have the right attitude and try and train them. So one thing we always recommend is try and understand the core values that you're building your company around and your culture around, and then hire for cultural fit. When you do this, you should be prepared to lose employees who are not a good fit. There's a system out there called the Enterprise Operating System, and EOS, and they basically use that to try and find the right fit for the organization based on what it does. And even they say, be prepared to lose a few employees here or there, because at the end of the day, you're trying to shape the business around delivering the best service for the customer. Now, it says embrace employee experience and the rule of congruent experience. So employee experience is basically the sum of all of the perceptions that your employees have as they interact with the business. And the rule of congruent experience says that the way that a business treats its employees typically translates into the customer experience. So if you're in a very toxic company and there's a blame culture and people won't be accountable, then you can expect to see those effects start to spill into the customer experience. And so this is something that I always ask people to pay attention to, and to be very deliberate about how they design their employee experiences. And we'll talk about the design competency in a few moments. Find ways to connect your employees with the differences that they are making to the lives of customers. Storytelling is a great tool, obviously, but basically, if you can't take your employees out to the customer, then storytelling is a good way of bringing the customer in. But it's always good, especially if you have conferences or user groups, to try and get them to meet so they can, it sounds obvious, but they need to know that they're real people with real problems and they're making a difference by helping them. Incentives should be tied to the customer experience and other internal motivators, not operational goals such as average call time. We don't want to incentivize our employees to get rid of customers. We want to incentivize them to do the right thing. I'm kind of on the fence when it comes to incentives. I even wonder if incentives even need to be used at all. I know that's a kind of a controversial opinion, but I've worked only in one company that had incentives that were monetary driven, and it turned everybody into mercenaries, and the clients were definitely put last, and hitting bonuses were definitely hit first, and even good people took that attitude as well. I don't know necessarily about incentivizing people to do the right thing. I mean, I think that if you're going to hire the right people, that should be enough incentive for them anyway. And then the other thing I recommend is building Slack into teams to avoid burnout. The other advantage of building Slack is that if the team isn't running at 100% full throttle all the time, it gives other team members a chance to be able to contribute in ways that help the team. So, for example, a few years ago, I worked at a business and they were the team was at risk, and we were doing work that if you made one little mistake, it could result in a very bad situation for a client, and that could actually also result in the firing of an employee. And so I took it upon myself to use a little bit of flex time to go and build a tool that would basically stop that small chance of human error. And the reason I did that was obviously to protect my team, but it was innovation as well, because ultimately I'm not only protecting my team, but I'm protecting the client as well. So then aligning the organization. So really what this means is establishing a governance system. And what that means is this is an organization's deliberate, structured approach to CX. So you will decide how your customer experience projects are prioritized, how they're approved and how they're managed, what types of CX data will be gathered and how it will be used, what KPIs and metrics will be used. A lot of the times a business won't necessarily know its KPIs, but it will be able to create its metrics again from the mission statement. If you say that we want to be the top selling business that does X in this town or this region, then you've already got a few metrics there that you can start using. If you're talking about providing high quality, that could be another one. And then the KPIs really are the metrics that matter. They always say that, metrics are where you measure, and KPIs are why you measure. And you'll see that those start to trend with business results, and that's why they are the key performance indicators. You need to establish your roles, accountabilities, standards, and processes, and create what we call a code of conduct. A code of conduct can be used in different ways. I'm going to show you one in a minute that we created here at JMark. But basically the idea is that you don't give people like big binders of information on this is how you behave when you're with clients or when you're communicating internally. You give them just a guide, and it just talks about these are the things that you ideally should do and these are the things you ideally should not. Killing stupid rules is a term that was coined by Gene Bliss, who wrote Chief Customer Officer 2.0. And all that really means is listen to your employees, and if they're telling you that there's unnecessary red tape, just get rid of it. You don't want people to have to keep jumping through unnecessary hurdles. Obviously, correct process is important, but sometimes process can get bloated. And that's why I say adopt a rigorous approach to change management. You can use, Kotter's framework. You can use ADKAR. There's a number of different ones out there, but adopt a structured approach, because not having a structured approach is one of the main reasons why a lot of change management efforts fail. And believe me, customer experience is all about change management. You want to adopt a rigorous approach to both project and process management as well. When we do customer journey mapping, we want to make sure that we're mapping out our processes as well, so that we completely understand what is affecting the client. And then Hoshin planning, also known as Hoshin-Kanri, is basically a term that means that you cascade your objectives down through the organization. So it ensures that everybody strategically is pulling in the same direction. So here's an example of a code of conduct. We built this here at JMark, and what we did is this is for internal communications, and all we said is, let's divide them up into the key types, and then we'll list out the things that ideally, you should do and ideally you should not do. It's not 100% hard and fast. We do encourage people to use their discretion, and then we also have another sheet that we put up around the office too that just describes like general etiquette. So, for example, be respectful of other people's time. Check people's calendars, that kind of thing. So those general ones kind of apply to most situations. And then when we have our specific communication styles, we created this. If you were doing this for, say working with customers, what you would probably do is for each of your touch points or your key touch points, you would do something similar, and you would list out these are the things that ideally we'd like you to see you do when you interact, and then things that we would prefer you rather didn't do. So introducing a voice of customer system, the key is to determine your customer types. And I always say beliefs are the essence of customer types, not demographics. How customers behave has very little to do with their gender or pigmentation of their skin or how old they are. Don't get me wrong, those things are important, especially, given the way that in the digital world we can see that the breakdown between different age groups shows different behaviors in terms of how they're using systems or how they're using channels. But essentially, if you really want to understand your customer types, you need to go a little bit deeper than that. And one of the really good questions you can ask is, what do you like about what we're doing and what do you not like about what we're doing? And those can help divide up. There's a really interesting book called What Customers Crave, and he gives a great example in the book, the author talking about car washes. And he said, okay, so everybody that goes to a car wash, they want to get their car washed, fine. But what are the other needs? What are the other wants? Well, some people want to go through really quickly. They don't want to wait in line. Other people want a real quality service, attention to detail, people, all over them doing all the work. And so when you look at all these different ways of approaching the experience, you can suddenly see that there are individual customer types. And I think he named one of them like speedy. So that customer type is someone who just wants to get in and out as quickly as possible, and they will not tolerate sitting in line. And then once you know your customer types, that also helps you, as I mentioned with the strategic part earlier on, you then know, well, okay, are these the customer types that we want to cater to? Because you have to make those hard decisions. Who are our customers and who are the people that we're actually going to let go to competitors because they can do it better and we'd much rather focus on what we're good at. Understanding the drivers of each customer, what are they trying to achieve, what do they want? A lot of people always talk about customer needs, and one thing I've heard recently is don't worry about needs, because most needs are actually met. What do they want? What do the customers actually want? That's one good way to understand and break down the different drivers that are underneath each customer type. And then understanding the identity that each customer assumes is a powerful insight. And the reason I say this is, we have our own individual identities, and a lot of the time when we buy things, they're things that match the way that we see ourselves, and we always try our best to maintain a consistency with that identity. But on the flip side of that, there's also group identity as well. And so sometimes people will make product purchases based on the group identity they're in as well. So there's a nice healthy tension between group and individual identity, and it's important to understand those dynamics. And the only way to do that is with detailed research. So what I recommend is you map your key customer journeys for each customer type. Pay special attention to cues. So those are things that essentially tell customers how to behave. Like when you go to a website and you see a log on screen, instinctively you know what to do. And sometimes if you use the wrong cues in the wrong places, they can confuse customers, cause them to engage the logical part of their brain, cause cognitive depletion. So that's why we recommend actually doing these deep dives with customers. The best way to do it is to begin with the broader phases of each journey and then work your way down to the key touch points and conduct research to learn about the customer's key pain points. So what you want to do is look at qualitative research, which is focus groups, interviews, open-ended question, anything that basically comes through in the written word, and then quantitative research, which comes through as numerical or financial information. You know, how long was this user on the website for, and the results come back in seconds. You know, at what point in the funnel did they abandon the purchase, that kind of thing. So the combination of these two types of information will be very useful. And then it sounds obvious, but it has to be said. You then simply fix the problems that are of the highest values to customers and the business, and then close the loop with them. So you get back in touch with them and you let them know, thank you for your feedback, and then you show them the changes that you've made. So when it comes to designing branded experiences, my advice is always this: be a control freak. The more control you have over what customers think and feel, the more control you will have over the experience outcome. Because again, I mentioned the emotions are such an important part, but you can only really be a control freak once you actually understand the customer. So you need to get that voice of customer system in place, and you really need to start spending time with your customers and understanding what they want. Another good way of designing a branded experience is customer co-creation. So you actually involve them in the different stages. And this is kind of where design thinking became popular, because it's a tool that you can use to kind of tease out those hidden needs and find out-of-the-box solutions. And it's definitely very good when you can bring customers and a business together and have a design thinking workshop. Some studies came out in 2012 from the London School of Economics that showed that reliability actually contributes more to a customer experience and the resulting revenue than moments of delight. So basically what I'm saying is, yeah, you can put all these wow moments in, but the most important thing is just to make the experience very consistent, very reliable. When I go to Amazon, there's never any bad surprises. I always know exactly what to expect. And that, again, the primal part of my brain is able to just do what it does, and I don't need to worry about cognitive depletion or getting stressed. And then the final point I want to make on designing branded experiences, there's a really good book called The Brain at Work by David Rock, and he introduces something called the SCARF model. And in this, what he basically says is there are 5 things shown by his studies in neuroscience that can upset the emotional part of our brain, the primal part of our brain. And these are things that you ideally want to avoid, but if you can actually play to them and make them better, then it will actually enhance the emotional side of the customer experience. And of course, the more emotional bond that somebody feels with your brand, as we said earlier, then there's going to be more affection. They're more likely to recommend you or come back. Those areas are status. A really good example of status is when you see someone buy, like a $200,000 car, when really a car just takes you from A to B. What are they really doing? They're showing the status, and people are willing to pay more for status. Different customer types sometimes are different customer types, sometimes are not. I'm someone who's happy with a compact car, but like I said, other people might want to spend the money. Consistency, we already touched on. Autonomy is giving the user a feeling of control. It might seem that kind of contradicts the earlier statement, but that's where the finesse is. You need to design these experiences out in such a way that your users feel they have a feeling of control. When I'm on Amazon, I feel fully in control, but that experience is completely controlled by Amazon. So think of it that way. Relatedness means the bond between people. And so that's something where with customer service reps, with the way that the salespeople treat customers, trying to make sure that bond is increased. Excuse me. And then fairness. People have a very strong sense of fairness. And so people want to make sure that if they talk to other customers, that they feel that they're getting a good deal, they didn't miss out on something, and they're being treated appropriately. Anything that you can do to make people feel that they're being treated very, very fairly will enhance the experience. Anything that goes in the opposite direction, of course, will do the opposite. So in terms of design, I created something called a customer experience hierarchy of needs. And I use this when I look at evaluating existing experiences, and then I also use it to generate and design new experiences as well. There's a few of these models out there, so if you Google this, you'll see that there's different ones, different pyramids, and they're different stages. I designed my one because I wanted to try and capture a generic experience. So any experience that you can imagine, going on a cruise, buying a product, getting married, whatever, I felt that this pyramid, this hierarchy actually summarized it very nicely. And so the stages are, firstly, does the customer feel assured? So do they feel safe engaging? There's no sense of danger, intimidation, or isolation. Think of if you've ever been in a situation where you wanted to go into a shop or you wanted to engage in some kind of an experience, but you were scared or that you didn't feel welcome. I mean, feeling welcome is actually a really good example. My wife called a medical line recently and during an emergency over a holiday, and she was treated so badly and disrespected so much that she just refuses to call them up. And I've seen other people with businesses as well where they don't want to call into the helpline because they feel that they're treated in a unreasonable manner, and they're disrespected, and they're made to feel, again, their status and their fairness is affected. So this is kind of where Assured comes in. So you want to make sure that everything from the design of the storefront to the marketing materials, everything makes people feel safe engaging. Then when they engage, the next step is to make sure they feel informed. So, okay, you feel safe going into Best Buy, but if you can't find anybody to help you, and maybe there's two products and you don't know which one you want to buy, and you can't get the help you need, you're most likely just going to leave and go to a competitor or go figure it out on the internet. So making sure that the customer can get the information they need is very important. This is where the cues come in that I mentioned earlier. So you want to make as minimal effort on the customer's part to be able to achieve these goals. Then you get to aligned. So this is where you actually go through and you complete the experience. So you say, okay, everything worked out the way it was. My expectations were met. There were no bad surprises, and I had a nice feeling of control the whole way through. Good, that's great. But there's a stage above that, and that's where the user feels the experience is emotionally positive and enjoyable, and they feel a bond of trust. I'll give you a great example. I had AT&T come out to my house recently, and they were supposed to be putting in a line underneath the house. The tech comes to me and he says, Mike, I can't do anything because your crawl space is flooding. And there was like a torrential rain outside. I had no idea this was even happening. And it turned out that the house that I purchased recently had a water runoff that was flooding the crawl space well. And then, of course, that was seeping into the crawl space. So I basically said, look, you've done everything you can. We'll just figure it out. We'll come back another day. Oh, no. This gentleman said, I'm here to get the job done, and I'm going to do what I can. He picks up a bucket and he starts scooping out the water. So, of course, I join in, and the two of us are scooping out this water. He actually then reinforces my crawl space well with gravel that he goes and gets from the neighbor's house. And I just couldn't believe it. He was going above and beyond. He was doing everything he could to make me feel like a valued customer. And so that's a really great example, and one that I hope makes a lot of sense to you. Then we come to measuring customer experiences, which is the final competency. So I mentioned earlier, good metrics always flow from very strong objectives, which come from the mission statement. Metrics are where you measure, KPIs are why you measure. There are three types of broad metrics in customer experience. There is the descriptive. So this would be like your operational data. This is what happens. Customer clicked here, they did this, they spent this amount of time, and then they purchased this amount, that kind of thing. Then you have perception, what the customer thought happened. So they normally will provide that in a survey, or maybe they'll complain or something like that. And then there's the outcome. So what was the end result? Did things carry on as normal? Did they suddenly buy more? Did they decide that they no longer wanted to be a customer? And tying those metrics together is how you can start to use this data to create business cases. So there's something called the Net Promoter Score, which measures advocacy. A lot of people try to say it measures loyalty, but it's more of a proxy for loyalty than anything, because the only way to truly measure loyalty is to see if people are actually coming back. would you recommend? How likely are you to recommend? Is the classic NPS question. Is really a measure of advocacy, and it has been shown to tie to growth. There's a whole book on it that we'll talk about later on. And it is commonly used for relationship surveys. What it does is it groups your customers into 3 groups: promoters, passives, and detractors. And we'll talk about those in a bit more. There's also customer satisfaction, which ranges from very dissatisfied to very satisfied, 5-point scale, although I've seen variants of it. And that's used to measure satisfaction. That's commonly done on a transactional basis. So here at JMark, every time one of our techs works with a client, and they've completed the work, a survey will go out, and it's normally a customer satisfaction survey for that specific transaction. So now we're going to talk about the case for customer experience ROI, because this is tricky, and a lot of people know how to do this, and there's not really much on Google either that explains how to do this. So let's go through this step by step. So first of all, a business must know, or it must at least have a hypothesis about what actions drive value in a business. And McKinsey recommend 3 to 5 key drivers. Some of these can be really obvious, especially depending on the line of work you're in. So if you're a bank and you have certain accounts that make a lot more money than others, people opening those accounts, those actions are adding a lot of value to the business. Likewise, there's certain values that don't add a lot of value to the business. And so the key is to pick out the ones that really make a difference. Then what you do is you can link your perception metrics, what the customer thought about happened, to the outcome metrics for each NPS group. And so then you can go ahead and you can then make statements such as, my detractors churn at a rate of 40%, my promoters churn at 5%, my detractors accept cross-sell at a rate of 10%, my promoters at 50%. Probability is going to play a very big part in what we're about to talk about next. But the great thing about this is this isn't just numbers out of the sky, like when you're doing, risk planning. How likely is it's going to rain? Those kind of things. I mean, this is literally hard numbers that you can pull out of your systems, and that really is kind of at the heart of how you can then use this to form business cases. So a common technique is to try and estimate the value of each of the NPS groups. In an ideal world, we would just take everybody in each of the groups and we just be able to say, okay, this is the amount of revenue they bring in, this is the amount of cost, therefore this is what each customer group's worth. But it's sometimes not that simple, especially like, for example, here at JMark, we might have 1 or 2 clients that spend 10 times as much as another. So how are you going to figure out the average value of a promoter, for example? It's not so simple. Also, the costs aren't always, this cost went to this client, this cost went to this client. The costs tend to be spread out. So that's why it's never been that straightforward to do this. But the method I'm going to show you hopefully will help. The key is to know what the probability of each of the groups are to take the desired action, and then we can calculate the value of moving a certain percentage of customers from one group, say passives, to another group, such as promoters. So we're going to do a worked example. And in this worked example, I'm going to keep it real simple. I mean, these numbers could probably, they could relate to a lemonade stand or something, but feel free to add as many zeros in as necessary to make this actually work for your business. But let's take a hypothetical business. So it has a core offering, and that core offering generates $100 of profit. Again, you can use revenue, but that's going to kind of get a little bit murky with cost. So if you're able to try and figure out a close approximation of what the profit will be, that would be very useful. Then you want to think about, for the hypothetical business, then we want to look at the other individual items that add value to the business. So cross-sell add-on, $15 of additional profit. Upgrade, $30 of additional profit. So that's our business that we're going to be looking at today. And then the 4 stages are very simple. First of all, you identify the outcomes that add value, and we've kind of already hinted at what those 3 things are. Then we want to calculate the probabilities for those outcomes per customer type. And then we're going to use something called expected monetary value, and we'll talk about that a little bit, to express the ROI, and then we can use that information to justify our CX efforts. So step 1, the 3 drivers that we're going to look at. So we want high cross-sell, or people who are just engaging in cross-sell, engaging in upgrade, and then contract renewal of the base product. And essentially what this is the opposite of churn. So it's a low churn rate, a high contract renewal. So we know that these 3 things definitely add value. In fact, they're not even hypotheses. We know for sure that when they do this, it generates additional revenue, additional profit. So the next thing we need to do is we need to calculate the outcomes for the drivers per customer type. So you can see I've broken them down into each of the categories. So we have our promoters, and this again is a hypothetical. So we've imagined we've pulled this data out of an operational system, and it's telling us promoters have a 40% of them buy the cross-sell, 50% upgrade, 90% renew. And we can see those numbers out for passives and detractors. One thing I wanted to do, I don't know if you guys can see it, is in the passives, I've got a lower renewal rate than detractors. Normally what you would expect to see is the numbers going down as you move to the right. So great with promoters, okay with passives, not so good with detractors. The reason I put this in is because life a lot of times doesn't always work the way that theory does. And so it's important to point that out. Also, I've seen a lot of examples recently where this actually has been the case. And the most obvious reason for this is that if somebody is giving you a really low score, but they're still a customer, it's most likely that they're what we call a hostage type of customer. They can't really go anywhere else. Whereas a passive tend to be very price sensitive. And so those are the customers that, if we don't like, we'll move somewhere else and not too bought in one way or another. And so that's kind of why I put this example in there. Again, it might be different when you do it for your own businesses, but I just wanted to put something that was a little bit more real world than just full theory. And then McKinsey says, try and get 2 years of data so you can see trends, because you want to make sure that if, for example, the cross-sell rate in general is slowly going down across all customer types, that you get that information in there, because you want these numbers to be as accurate as possible. Then what you do is you use expected monetary value to express the ROI. What expected monetary value does is it takes the probability of an action happening and then it multiplies it by the gain that you get. So in this case, $15 for the cross-sell, 30 for the upgrade, 100 for the renewal. And by pulling out these numbers, it actually allows you to figure out on average, how are we going to do if we have a customer that's a promoter, if we're going to have a customer that's a passive and one that's a detractor. And it uses probability and impact, and it's used by a lot of legal firms. Legal firms use this when they're trying to assess whether it's even worth engaging in in a lawsuit or not. And project managers use this as well, especially with risk management too, to try and understand the possibility of going one direction or another. They're typically used with something called decision trees. But in this case, with what we're doing with this example, we don't need to worry about decision trees. But the nature of expected monetary value still holds true. So what we can see is if we wanted to move a detractor to a passive, it would actually end up losing us money. And that's possible. That's wholly possible. Another point I will make is that for some businesses, moving a detractor to a passive might be more valuable than moving a passive to a promoter. So again, once you've got this information built out, you can then see the value. And so likewise, when we go and look at our moving a detractor over to a promoter, we can see that there's actually $66.50 to be gained. And then we can see the estimated value of each of our customer types. So we can see promoters is obviously the most valuable, then with detractor coming in second, passive third. So with that all in mind, what we can now do is use this information to justify our CX efforts. So let's say we have a CX team and they've come up with a project they want to present to executive management, and it's going to cost them $2,000. And they say, look, if we implement this program, we're confident we can move 20% of our detractors to promoters. How will they be confident, by the way? Well, that's where your voice of customer comes in. You understand what makes the difference between these promoters and detractors. You listen to the things they're saying. Another good example is to try and find customers that were detractors that have moved to promoters and find out what it was that shifted the needle. This is, again, it's a hypothesis. You're trying to predict the future, but this is giving you a structured way to do that. So then what you can say is, okay, if I know my cost is $2,000 and I know the average customer is going to be the average customer that I move from a detractor to a promoter is going to be worth $66, then I can once I've rounded it up, figure out what I'm going to need to at least break even. So in this case, we want 31 detractors moved, and we want to make sure that at least 20% of all the detractors are moved over. Now, like I said earlier, if it were possible to cleanly calculate the value of each of the 3 net promoter customer types, then this would be much simpler. I mean, you wouldn't have to go through all of this stuff. It would be much easier, but it's not always so clear cut. So that's kind of why I wanted to show you this method that I think works really nicely. So recommendations to close the presentation out. Outside In, again, by Forrester Research, is a very good book. It gives you a very high-level overview of the customer experience world. It's the book that's best recommended for CEOs and business leaders. The 10 Principles Behind Great Customer Experience is an excellent book because it uses principles, of course, rather than lots of information that's going to bombard you. These are principles that you can take with you, memorize very easily, and apply them. And then the Ultimate Question 2.0 is very useful because it does a deep dive into the world of Net Promoter Score. I will also touch on one thing before I close, which is Net Promoter Score is the example I use to break down customers. In this example, you don't have to use that. You can use any system you want. The key is that if you can find really clear differences in value between whatever customer types you've created or that you're using, that's the most important part. If you're not finding very much differences, then it's going to be very hard to make that business case. But if you're seeing very clear behavioral differences and financial differences between each of your customer types, then you can go ahead and use expected monetary value to be able to make predictions and make business cases to move the needle. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Christina now to see if any questions have come in that I could help with.
Looks like you pretty much covered it, Michael.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, if anyone wants to contact me, they can email me on mbartlett@jmark.com with any follow-ups. And please let me know if this was useful to you and if there's any other questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael, for sharing all this with everyone today. And to all of the listeners, thank you so much for joining us. Just to remind you, our next webinar is 5 Choices in Leader, A Path to Extraordinary Success. And you can see all the information for that at jmark.com/events. So that we hope that you will come back for that one as well. And please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like a recording of this webinar. We did record it, so we'd be happy to send it to you. Just shoot us an email at jmark@jmark.com. And that wraps it up. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.